What if I told you that most people don't lose control because life is hard? They lose control because they never learned how to manage their emotions. In today's video on Mindcode Vault, we're diving into 8 powerful emotional control hacks from Master Your Emotions that actually work. Fast, simple, practical techniques you can start using immediately to stay calm, focused, and in control no matter what life throws at you. If you're tired of overreacting, feeling overwhelmed, or letting your emotions run your life, this video might be exactly what you need. So make sure you like, share, and comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe and press the bell icon so you never miss videos that can truly change the way you think and feel. There is a moment most people never talk about. It happens in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, or maybe late at night when the house is quiet and the phone is finally face down on the nightstand. It is the moment when you realize that despite everything you have learned, everything you've achieved, everything you have tried to build, your emotions are still running the show. Not you, not your logic, not your carefully constructed plans. Your emotions. And they are making decisions on your behalf that you would never consciously agree to. You snapped at someone you loved because you were stressed about money. You stayed silent in a meeting where you had the best idea in the room because some old fear grabbed you by the throat. You scrolled for 2 hours instead of working on the thing that actually matters because anxiety disguised itself as rest. You know this pattern. You have lived inside it. And the most exhausting part is not the emotions themselves. It is the gap between knowing better and actually doing better. That gap is where most people quietly give up on themselves. This order where it exists to close that gap. Not with theory. Not with the kind of advice that sounds good in a highlight reel but dissolves the moment your boss sends a passive-aggressive email, or your business hits a wall, or someone you trusted lets you down. What you are about to hear is drawn from the work of Thibaut Moiris, whose book Master Your Emotions has quietly become one of the most practical frameworks for emotional intelligence available today. And the reason it works, the reason people return to it, is because it does not ask you to stop feeling. It asks you to stop being unconsciously controlled by what you feel. Those are two entirely different things. And understanding that difference is where everything begins. Let us start with the hack that almost no one talks about because it is so counterintuitive it feels wrong the first time you hear it. The hack is this. You do not have to believe your emotions, not dismiss them, not suppress them, not perform some kind of spiritual bypass where you pretend they do not exist. But you do not have to treat them as objective truth either. Because here is what your brain is actually doing when an emotion rises up in you. It is not giving you a live report on reality. It is giving you a prediction. Your nervous system is a pattern-matching machine, and it has spent decades cataloging every threatening or rewarding experience you have ever had. When something in your present environment resembles something from your past, it fires off an emotional signal before your conscious mind has even had time to process what is happening. That feeling of dread in your chest when you get a notification from your boss. Your brain did not wait for you to read the message. It matched the notification sound to past experiences of criticism or conflict and started releasing cortisol preemptively. The emotion arrived before the data. So the first hack is learning to pause at the emotion and ask, is this a feeling or is this a fact? They feel identical from the inside. That is the trap. And building even a 2-second window between stimulus and response is the beginning of everything else. The reason this matters so urgently right now, in this particular era, is that the world we are navigating has been specifically engineered to exploit that pattern-matching system of yours. Social media platforms, news algorithms, even many workplace communication tools are designed to keep your emotional brain activated because an activated emotional brain is an engaged one. And engagement is currency. Every ping, every like, every piece of outrage bait your feed surfaces is a direct injection into the oldest part of your neurology. And if you have not built the internal infrastructure to metabolize these inputs, you are not a thinking person making conscious choices. You are a collection of reactions being monetized. The freelancers who are building sustainable creative businesses right now. The entrepreneurs who are scaling in this AI-saturated economy. The employees who are getting promoted and trusted. With more responsibility, they are not necessarily smarter or more talented than you. They have just learned to respond rather than react. That is a skill. It is trainable. And we are going to break down exactly how. The second hack builds directly on the first. And it concerns the story you are telling yourself about what your emotions mean. Moiris makes a point in his work that most people overlook because it is embedded in what seems like obvious territory. He observes that we do not suffer from our emotions as much as we suffer from our interpretation of our emotions. Think about anxiety for a moment. Physiologically, anxiety and excitement produce almost identical bodily states: elevated heart rate, heightened sensory awareness, a sense of something imminent. The difference between the person who experiences that state as paralyzing and the person who experiences it as energizing is almost entirely narrative. One person says, "I am anxious," which means something bad is about to happen, which means I am not capable of handling it. The other person says, I am activated, which means my body is preparing me, which means something important is happening and I am ready. Same feeling, radically different outcomes. The story is not incidental to the emotion. The story determines what the emotion does to your behavior. And this is not positive thinking in the bumper sticker sense. This is cognitive reappraisal, one of the most robustly supported interventions in modern psychology. You're not lying to yourself when you reframe. You are choosing a more accurate and more useful interpretation of genuinely ambiguous data, because your body's stress response does not know the difference between a line and a difficult conversation. You have to provide that context. You're the author of that context. And most people have been unknowingly writing very dark stories about themselves for a very long time. Here is a practical illustration. Imagine you are a freelancer pitching a new client, someone whose contract would genuinely change your financial situation. The night before the call, you cannot sleep. Your mind is running worst-case scenarios. You wake up feeling hollow and heavy and convinced this is a sign that something will go wrong. The untrained response is to treat that feeling as prophecy, to walk into the call already half defeated, already bracing for rejection, which then colors your energy and your language and the way you hold your body, which then actually does reduce your chances of success. The trained response is to name the emotion explicitly, acknowledge that it makes sense given what is at stake, and then deliberately rewrite the meaning. Not I am terrified, therefore I will fail, but I care about this, therefore I am prepared to show up fully. Same sleepless night, same bodily sensation, completely different trajectory. This is not a small thing. This reframe is worth thousands of dollars to a freelancer. It is worth a promotion to an employee. It is worth entire chapters of someone's life story. The third hack moves us into territory that most productivity culture refuses to address honestly, which is the relationship between your emotional state and your identity. Moiris dedicates significant attention to the problem of emotional fusion, which is when you stop observing your emotions and start becoming them. You are not angry. You are experiencing anger. You are not a failure. You are feeling the emotion of failure, which is real and valid and also completely distinct from your actual worth and capability. This sounds like semantics until you understand what it does neurologically. When you fuse with an emotion, you recruit your entire sense of self into defending or perpetuating it. If being angry becomes part of who you are in a given moment, your brain will find reasons to stay angry because abandoning the anger feels like abandoning yourself. If feeling like a failure becomes your identity, you will unconsciously reject evidence of success because it threatens the coherence of your self-concept. This is why some people catastrophize so reliably. It is not that they are broken. It is that they have unknowingly made catastrophizing part of how they know themselves. The hack is to create psychological distance from your emotional states using language and perspective. Instead of, I am overwhelmed, try, I notice, I am having a feeling of overwhelm. It sounds clinical. It feels strange at first. But that tiny linguistic shift activates the prefrontal cortex in a measurable way. It moves you from inside the experience to slightly above it. And from slightly above it, you can make choices. From inside it, you can only react. This becomes particularly critical in the context of professional life and the new economy we are all navigating. The people who are thriving in a world being reshaped by artificial intelligence are not necessarily the ones who never feel uncertain or displaced. They are the ones who can experience the uncertainty without becoming it. The freelancer who loses a major client can feel the grief of that loss without concluding that they are fundamentally unemployable. The entrepreneur whose product launch underperforms can feel the disappointment without deciding the entire venture is doomed. The employee being asked to integrate AI tools into their workflow can feel the discomfort of change without interpreting that discomfort is evidence that they are obsolete. Emotional fusion is the mechanism that turns ordinary setbacks into identity crises. Breaking that fusion is the mechanism that turns identity crises back into ordinary setbacks. The fourth hack is about what happens in your body, and it is one that busy, ambitious people consistently underestimate. Moiris is clear on this. Your emotional state is not just a psychological phenomenon, it is a physiological one. And this means you can intervene at the physical level to shift your emotional experience with a speed and reliability that purely cognitive approaches cannot always match. Your posture, your breathing, your movement patterns, the way you are holding tension in your jaw or your shoulders right now as you listen to this. All of these are not just symptoms of your emotional state, they are inputs to it. The feedback loop runs in both directions. When you are in a fear state, your breathing becomes shallow and rapid, which in turn signals to your nervous system that there is ongoing danger, which deepens the fear state. This is not a metaphor, this is a documented physiological loop, and you can interrupt it deliberately. A slow exhale, longer than your inhale, activates the parasympathetic nervous system. Rolled shoulders and a caved chest literally suppress testosterone and elevate cortisol within minutes. Changing your physical posture before a high-stakes interaction is not a performance trick. It is a direct neurochemical intervention. The hack here is to build a 2-minute physical reset practice that you deploy before any situation you know will be emotionally demanding, not afterward, when you are already in the reactivity spiral. Before, when you still have the agency to set the conditions for your own response. For those of you building businesses or navigating high-stakes client relationships or preparing for negotiations, this is not soft advice. This is strategy. Before you get on that investor call, before you have the difficult conversation with your co-founder, before you sit down to do the deep work that requires your full cognitive capacity, your physical state is either an asset or a liability. Most people leave it to chance, the ones who do not have an enormous edge. The fifth hack is perhaps the most uncomfortable one to sit with, and it concerns the hidden payoffs of negative emotional patterns. Here is something Maurice illuminates with unusual clarity. Most emotional patterns, even the ones that cause us suffering, exist because they are serving some function we have not consciously examined. The person who constantly catastrophizes is not self-destructing for no reason. Catastrophizing feels like protection. If I imagine the worst outcome, then I will not be caught off guard by it. The person who erupts in anger regularly is not simply broken. Anger often feels like power to people who otherwise feel powerless. The person who retreats into numbness and scrolling in comfortable distraction is not weak. Numbness is a survival response to stimulation the nervous system cannot process. These patterns made sense once. They may have been adaptive in environments that no longer exist. The problem is that the brain does not automatically retire strategies that used to work, even when they have become costly. You have to actively examine the payoff. You have to ask, what am I getting from this pattern that I am afraid I will not have access to if I change it? This is not an easy question. It requires a quality of self-honesty that most personal development content can be cites, but it is the question that actually unlocks change, because you cannot dismantle a strategy until you understand what problem it was trying to solve. And once you understand that problem, you can find a more effective solution that does not come with the same costs. Consider someone who grew up in an unstable household where conflict was unpredictable and dangerous. That person very likely developed a head-trigger emotional response to perceived criticism. Because in their early environment, being alert to signs of incoming conflict was a survival skill. Fast forward 20 years, they are in a creative meeting and a colleague gently challenges their idea. The old system fires instantly, the heart rate spikes, the defenses go up. The response becomes disproportionate in ways that damage relationships and reputation and collaboration. The behavior looks irrational from the outside. From the inside, it is the nervous system doing exactly what it learned to do. The hack is not to bully yourself into acting differently. The hack is to meet the old strategy with compassion, thank it for what it once provided, and then consciously offer the adult version of yourself a better tool. The sixth hack is about the environment you are building around yourself, and most people dramatically underestimate its impact on emotional regulation. Maurice is insistent on this point. Willpower and internal discipline are finite resources. They can be trained and expanded, but they are always operating within a context. And the context either supports your emotional health or undermines it. The people in your immediate circle, the media you consume, the physical spaces you spend most of your time in, the notifications enabled on your phone, the first thing you read when you wake up in the morning, all of these are continuously shaping, with a baseline emotional state from which you are trying to operate. This is not about becoming precious or building a bubble of artificial positivity. This is about taking seriously the idea that you are always in a relationship with your environment, and that relationship is always going somewhere. If the loudest voices in your daily input stream are voices of anxiety, outrage, comparison, and scarcity, your default emotional state will drift toward those frequencies whether you consciously agree to it or not. You will become what you repeatedly encounter. The hack is to do a deliberate audit, not once, as a productivity exercise, but as an ongoing practice. What are the 5 inputs that have the greatest impact on your daily emotional baseline? And for each one, ask honestly, does this make me more capable of being who I want to be or less? The answer requires courage more than intelligence. And acting on the answer requires even more. In the current economy, this environmental audit has a specific and urgent application. The content ecosystem around entrepreneurship, freelancing, and building in the AI age is saturated with anxiety-generating material. Hustle culture content that makes you feel like a failure for sleeping. Comparison content disguised as inspiration. Viral posts about market disruption designed to trigger just enough fear to keep you clicking. None of this information is neutral. It is all being processed by a nervous system that cannot distinguish between a real threat and a symbolic one. And a nervous system running on manufactured urgency is a nervous system that cannot think clearly, create boldly, or sustain the long horizon thinking that real success in any field actually requires. Protecting your emotional environment is not a luxury. It is a competitive advantage. The 7th hack is the one that ties everything together, and it is about what Maurice describes as the practice of emotional befriending, not management, not control, in the domineering sense. befriending. The subtle but profound real here is from a war footing to a collaborative one. Every emotion you experience, even the ones that feel most destructive, is carrying information. Jealousy is information about what you value and believe you cannot have. Resentment is information about where your boundaries have been violated. Shame is information about the gap between your behavior and your values. Boredom is information that your mind is seeking stimulation and growth. Loneliness is information about an unmet need for genuine connection. When you treat emotions as enemies to be defeated, you lose access to the data they carry. And that data is often the most honest feedback you have about what is actually happening in your life and what your deepest self is asking for. The hack is to develop a consistent practice of emotional translation. When you notice a strong emotional response, before you either act it out impulsively or suppress it strategically, you pause. You name it as precisely as you can, because research by neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman and others shows that the act of precise emotional labeling, what psychologists call affect labeling, measurably reduces the intensity of the emotional experience and increases access to the prefrontal cortex. You then ask what this emotion is telling you about your current situation, your values, or your unmet needs. And then you decide consciously what, if anything, you want to do with that information. Now, this is not a slow process once you have practiced it. With repetition, the whole sequence can happen in seconds, but it must be practiced. Like any language, the language of your own interior life requires consistent use before it becomes fluent. There is an eighth dimension to all of this that we have been moving toward throughout this entire journey together, and it is perhaps the most important one to leave you with. It is the dimension of time. All of the hacks we have explored, the pause, the reframe, the diffusion, the physical reset, the payoff examination, the environmental audit, the emotional translation, all of them are practices that exist in the present moment. They require you to be here, now, attending to what is actually happening in and around where you with a quality of awareness that modern life seems designed to make impossible. But here's what Moiris understands, and what the research on emotional intelligence consistently confirms. The quality of your life, measured not by your circumstances but by your actual lived experience of being alive, is almost entirely a function of the relationship you have with your own emotional world, not the events that happen to you. The relationship you have with what those events produce in you, and that relationship is not fixed. It is not determined by your history or your temperament or the particular neurological hand you were dealt. It is something you can choose to develop deliberately and systematically, beginning with the very next moment of emotional intensity. You encountered. We are living through a period of extraordinary disruption. The economy is being restructured by forces that move faster than most human institutions can adapt to. The nature of work, of value, of how people build financial security and meaningful careers is shifting in ways that are producing real and legitimate uncertainty for millions of people. In that context, the ability to regulate your own emotional state, to remain clear-headed when the noise is overwhelming, to access your creativity and judgment and relational intelligence when the pressure is highest. This is the foundational skill that every other skill depends on. You cannot think clearly when your amygdala is running the show. You cannot be genuinely creative when you are in a sustained threat response. You cannot build trust with clients, collaborators, or the people you love when you are fused with your own emotional reactivity. The ceiling on every other capacity you have is set by your emotional intelligence, and most people have never been taught to deliberately raise that ceiling. So let this be the moment you decide to take that seriously, not in the abstract feel-good, momentarily inspired way that fades by Thursday. In the concrete, daily practice, return to it even when you fail way that actually produces transformation over time, the 2-second pause before you respond. The linguistic shift from I am to I notice I am. The physical reset before the high-stakes call. The honest inventory of what your hardest emotions are actually trying to protect. The deliberate curation, where the inputs that shape your emotional baseline day by day. These are small things. They're also, in aggregate, the difference between a life you are experiencing and a life that is happening to you. The cost of ignoring this is not abstract. It is paid in the relationships that quietly erode because your reactions were never really about the person in front of you. It is paid in the opportunities missed because fear dressed up as practicality and you agreed. It is paid in the work that never gets made because perfectionism, which is just shame in a suit, convinced you that not starting was safer than failing. It is paid in the long, slow accumulation of small capitulations to your own worst impulses until you look up one day and realize you have spent years being managed by something inside you that you never chose and never examined and never decided to change or have chosen differently today. That choice, sustained and practiced, is the whole of what mastery means.